Tonight, we journey into that mystery, into the silence where cities were, into the darkness where knowledge was lost, into the sacred uncertainty of civilizations that rose and fell before history learned to remember them. There is a threshold we cross when we seek the lost, a boundary between what is known and what is forgotten, between what history recorded and what time erased. Beyond that threshold lies a landscape of ruins and whispers, of monuments without makers, of scripts without readers, of cities that flourished for centuries and then dissolved into silence so complete that even their names have been forgotten. We call them lost civilizations, but they were not lost to those who lived within them. They were home. They were the world entire. The merchants who traded in their markets, the priests who prayed in their temples, the children who played in their streets, none of them knew they were lost. They were simply living. As we are living in cities they believed would stand forever, in cultures they assumed would never end, yet they ended. The cities emptied. The temples fell silent. The knowledge that had accumulated over generations, the astronomy and medicine, the philosophy and art, the understanding of how to build and how to heal and how to navigate by stars, much of this knowledge vanished when the last person who held it died without passing it on. The thread broke. The chain of transmission that connects each generation to the next was severed, and what remained were only stones. Tonight we enter that threshold. We will not find answers. The lost civilizations keep their secrets well, but we will find questions worthy of contemplation, mysteries that deepen rather than resolve, silences that speak in their own strange language. We will walk among ruins that once were homes, will trace roads that once led to destinations now forgotten, will stand before monuments built by peoples whose names have been erased by time. This is not a journey toward conclusion. It is a journey toward wonder, toward the recognition that human history is vaster than any chronicle can contain, that civilizations have risen and fallen beyond counting, that we are inheritors of knowledge that represents only a fraction of what humanity once knew. The rest is lost. The rest waits in the silence between what was and what is, in the space where memory fades and mystery begins. Let the night receive us. Let the lost civilizations speak in whatever voice remains to them. Let the journey begin. In the shallow waters, where morning light barely reaches, stone foundations rest beneath rippling silence. Walls that once held homes, streets that once guided feet, temples that once rose toward skies now replaced by currents and the slow drift of sediment. The cities drown before the dawn of our recorded memory, before the histories we trust began their counting. They sank beneath waves that the world has forgotten, and they wait there still, holding secrets in their waterlogged stones. The ocean remembers what land forgets. Along coastlines across the world, fishermen have always whispered of ancestors who lived where fish now swim, of temples glimpsed through blue-green depths, of walls that appear when tides are low and waters clear. For centuries, these whispers were dismissed as legend, as the imaginings of simple people who confused memory with myth. But the whispers were true. The cities are real. Archaeology has found them, resting in the silence beneath the waves. Off the coast of Gujarat in western India, where the Arabian Sea receives the sacred waters of rivers that have flowed since time beyond counting, lies the drowned city of Dwarka. The ancient texts speak of Dwarka as the kingdom of Krishna, as the city of impossible beauty that sank beneath the sea when the god departed. For millennia, scholars treated these texts as mythology, as the poetic exaggerations of religious devotion. Then divers descended into the waters off Gujarat. They found walls, they found foundations, they found a city. The ruins extend across kilometers of seafloor, stone structures aligned in patterns that suggest streets and districts, temple complexes, and residential areas. The dating is contested. Some artifacts suggest a city far older than the texts describe, older perhaps than any city we know by name. The questions multiply. When did Dwarka flourish? How large was its population? What catastrophe sent it beneath the wave? The ocean keeps its answers in the silence of the deep. But Dwarka is not alone. The Mediterranean holds its own drowned memories. Off the southern coast of Greece, beneath the waters of the Laconian Gulf, lies Pavlopetri, perhaps the oldest submerged city ever discovered. 5,000 years ago, before the pyramids rose at Giza, before Stonehenge was completed, Pavlopetri was a thriving Bronze Age settlement. Its streets were laid in careful patterns. Its buildings were constructed with attention to craft. Its harbour welcomed ships from across the ancient Mediterranean. Then the sea rose, or the land sank, or both occurred together in the slow geological transformation that reshapes coastlines across millennia. Pavlopetri slipped beneath the waves. Its inhabitants had time to leave. No bodies have been found. No evidence of sudden catastrophe. They simply walked away from a city that the water was claiming, walked to higher ground, began again elsewhere. But they left their city behind, and there it remained, forgotten, for nearly 5,000 years. Modern archaeology has mapped Pavlopetri's streets, has traced its buildings, has recovered artifacts that speak of daily life in cities so old that its builders had no writing, no metal tools, no knowledge that their city would someday be studied by people who could fly through the air and see through water with machines. The artifacts are humble, pottery fragments, stone tools, the simple objects of domestic existence. But they testify to lives lived, to families formed, to a community that flourished and then yielded to the patient advance of the sea. The pattern repeats across the world. In the Black Sea, where waters once were lower, where plains once stretched between the coasts we know today, settlements have been found in depths that were dry land 7,000 years ago. Some scholars believe the flooding of the Black Sea was sudden, catastrophic. Waters from the Mediterranean breaking through the Bosphorus in a torrent that raised sea levels by meters in months, that drowned coastal communities before they could flee. Others argue the flooding was gradual, spanning generations, allowing populations to retreat slowly before the advance of the waters. The truth is buried beneath layers of sediment, in cities too deep for easy excavation, in stones that keep their silence. Off the coast of Japan, in waters near the island of Yonaguni, stone structures rest on the seafloor, massive terraced formations that some believe are natural, others insist are man-made. The debate continues, but if the Yonaguni structures are artificial, they represent a civilization lost not merely to history, but to all human memory. A people who built in stone and vanished so completely that not even legends preserve their names. And there are more, always more. The coasts of the world are littered with submerged sites, with harbors that served ships before recorded history began, with settlements that the sea has claimed and held. The Mediterranean, the Black Sea, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, each holds its drowned secrets, its cities that flourished when shorelines were different, when sea levels were lower, when the world was a map we would not recognize. What does it mean that so many cities lie beneath the waves? Perhaps it means that humanity has always been drawn to coasts, to the abundance that shorelines offer, to the trade routes that oceans provide. Perhaps it means that sea levels have risen more than we remember, that the geography our civilizations know is not the geography that earlier peoples knew. Perhaps it means that much of human history occurred in places that are now underwater, that the archaeological record of land represents only a fraction of where humanity actually lived. The drowned cities cannot speak in languages we understand. Their scripts, if they had scripts, are lost. Their stories, if they had stories, are dissolved. What remains are stones arranged in patterns that suggest intention, foundations that imply buildings, streets that once led somewhere that mattered to someone now forgotten. We dive into these waters and we find evidence of lives lived, of communities formed, of the eternal human impulse to build and to gather and to make homes in places that seem permanent but were not. The waters that cover these cities are not transparent. Sediment clouds the depths. Algae obscures the walls. What might be visible in clear conditions is hidden for years at a time, revealed only when currents shift or storms clear the silt. The cities appear and disappear, glimpsed briefly and then veiled again, as if they are choosing when to be seen, as if they are revealing themselves only to those patient enough to wait. We close this chapter as the light fades over coastal waters, as the surface of the sea darkens from blue to grey to black. Somewhere below, the drowned cities continue their silent existence. The temples that once rose toward heaven now rise toward a surface they will never reach. The streets that once echoed with footsteps now know only the movement of currents. The walls that once held families now hold only water and the slow accumulation of time. They are not truly lost, these cities. They are waiting beneath the waves that claimed them, waiting for someone to remember their names, waiting in the patience that only the drowned can know, in the silence that only the sea can keep. Some languages refuse to speak to us. They exist in carved stone and pressed clay, in symbols arranged with obvious intention, in patterns that clearly meant something to someone, but not to us, not anymore. The knowledge of how to read them has been lost, and the languages themselves have become locked chambers. Their doors, visible, but their keys vanished. We stand before inscriptions that were meant to be read, that were carved by hands that assumed readers would always exist, and we find ourselves unable to fulfill the purpose for which the writing was created. The silence of undeciphered scripts is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of fullness without access, of meaning present but unreachable, of voices speaking in rooms we cannot enter. The symbols are not decoration. They are language. They encode thoughts and records and perhaps prayers, perhaps poems, perhaps knowledge that would transform our understanding if only we could read it. But we cannot. The scripts keep their silence. And we are left with the frustration of almost knowing, of seeing without comprehending. Consider the Indus Valley script. Across the ruins of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, across hundreds of sites spread through what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, archaeologists have recovered more than 4,000 inscriptions. The symbols appear on seals, on pottery, on tablets, on objects whose purpose we can only guess. The script was clearly important. No civilization invests such effort in writing unless writing matters. But what did it say? The inscriptions are short. The longest known example contains only 26 symbols. This brevity has frustrated every attempt at decipherment. There is not enough text to establish patterns, not enough repetition to identify grammatical structures, not enough context to guess at meanings. We do not know what language the script encoded, whether Dravidian or Indo-European or something else entirely, some language family that left no other traces. We do not know whether the symbols represented sounds or words or something between. We do not know whether the inscriptions were names or prayers or administrative records or something our categories cannot contain. What we know is that the Indus Valley civilization was sophisticated. Its cities were planned with precision that modern urban designers admire. Its drainage systems were advanced. Its standardized bricks suggest central authority, capable of maintaining consistency across vast distances. Its trade networks reached Mesopotamia, where Indus seals have been found in contexts that suggest commerce between civilizations. These were not primitive people. They built cities that housed tens of thousands. They maintained civilization for nearly 2,000 years. And then they vanished, leaving their script unread, their language unspoken, their voices trapped in symbols that time has not yet unlocked. The mystery deepens when we consider that the Indus script disappeared completely. When the civilization declined, whether through climate change, river shifts, or causes we cannot determine, the writing system died with it. No successor culture adopted it. No transitional scripts show evolution from Indus symbols to later Indian writing. The script simply ended, as if the knowledge of how to read and write it was held by specialists who died without training successors. as if the thread of transmission was cut so cleanly that nothing could be recovered. The Indus script is not alone in its silence. On the island of Crete, in the ruins of Minoan civilization, tablets inscribed in Linear A await readers who may never come. The Minoans flourished from approximately 2700 to 1450 BCE, built magnificent palaces, created art of stunning beauty, developed writing systems that served administrative purposes. Linear A was their primary script, used for records and inscriptions throughout their civilization. We can count the items listed in Linear A tablets. We can recognize numerical symbols, can identify what seem to be commodity words, can trace administrative patterns. But we cannot read the language. When the Mycenaean Greeks conquered Crete around 1450 BCE, they adopted a modified script, Linear B, that recorded an early form of Greek. Linear B has been deciphered. We can read what the Mycenaean administrators wrote, but Linear A remains locked, its language unknown, its sounds uncertain, its meaning imprisoned in clay that has waited 3.5 millennia for a reader who understands. Further across the world, on the most isolated inhabited island on Earth, another script keeps its silence. The Rongorongo tablets of Easter Island bear glyphs carved into wooden boards, symbols that may represent writing, may represent mnemonic devices for oral traditions, may represent something our categories cannot classify. Only 26 authentic Rongorongo objects survive. The last people who could read them died in the 19th century, victims of slave raids and diseases that devastated the island's population. No one living can read Rongorongo. No one can say with certainty what it was meant to record. The glyphs are beautiful, stylized figures of humans and animals and plants, arranged in lines that alternate direction, creating a pattern called reverse boustrophedon, where each line is written upside down relative to the previous one. The aesthetic is striking. The meaning is lost. Scholars have proposed interpretations, have suggested the tablets record genealogies, or creation chants, or astronomical observations. None of these proposals can be verified. The Rongorongo tablets speak in a language that died with the last islander who understood it. What does it mean that scripts can be lost? That knowledge of reading can be lost? We live in an age of unprecedented literacy, of writing systems taught to billions, of texts preserved in redundant copies across digital networks. We assume that once something is written, it is permanent, that the knowledge of reading, once acquired, cannot be forgotten. But the undeciphered scripts remind us that this assumption is false. Writing systems die. The knowledge of reading can be lost. Civilizations that seem eternal can vanish so completely that not even their languages survive. The silence of undeciphered scripts is a special kind of loss. When a building falls, we can study its ruins and imagine how it stood. When a tradition ends, we can sometimes reconstruct it from fragments and memories. But when a script becomes unreadable, the thoughts it encoded become inaccessible. The inscriptions remain. We can see them, can photograph them, can measure and categorize them. But we cannot hear what they were meant to say. The voices are there, preserved in the permanence of stone and clay, speaking in words that no one alive can understand. Perhaps this is why undeciphered scripts fascinate us. They represent the boundary of knowledge, the limit of what investigation can achieve. We have deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs, have unlocked Linear B, have learned to read Mayan glyphs that were mysterious for centuries. These victories give hope that other scripts might yield to analysis, that patient study might eventually provide keys to locked chambers. But there is no guarantee. Some scripts may be forever lost. Some voices may speak forever without being heard. We close this chapter contemplating a clay seal from the Indus Valley, small enough to hold in a palm, inscribed with symbols that someone carved 4,000 years ago. The seal was made to be pressed into soft clay, to mark ownership or authority, or something we cannot name. The symbols were meaningful to whoever made this seal, meaningful enough to be carved with care, meaningful enough to be used repeatedly across a lifetime. Now the meaning is gone. The symbols remain waiting in museum cases around the world, waiting for someone to remember how to read them, waiting in silence that may never be broken. Across landscapes where no one lives, ancient roads stretch toward horizons that offer no destination. They are engineered with precision that suggests importance, graded for drainage, straightened beyond what terrain would naturally allow, built to standards that required effort far exceeding casual paths. Yet they lead to places that no longer exist, connect ruins to other ruins, serve purposes that the builders considered vital, but that time has rendered incomprehensible. These are the roads that led to nowhere, not because they were built without purpose, but because the purposes they served have been forgotten. Roads are monuments to intention. Unlike temples that might have been built for the glory of gods, unlike tombs that might have been built for the honor of the dead, roads are practical structures built to move people and goods from one place to another. They reveal what civilizations considered important enough to connect, what destinations were worth the investment of labor and resources, what networks bound communities together across distances. When we find roads leading to emptiness, we find evidence of significance that has evaporated, of destinations that once mattered enough to justify massive construction, but now matter to no one. In the high desert of New Mexico, where the Colorado Plateau meets the San Juan Basin, the Chaco roads stretch across the landscape like geometry imposed on wilderness. They are not subtle. They are not paths worn by repeated passage. They are engineered features, often 30 feet wide, cut into the desert floor, cleared of vegetation and stones, graded and maintained by peoples who had no wheeled vehicles, no beasts of burden, nothing that would seem to require such elaborate roads. The roads radiate from Chaco Canyon, where the great houses stand in ruins, Pueblo Bonito, Chetroquetl, Pueblo del Arroyo, massive structures of hundreds of rooms that were built with precision that still impresses. The roads connect these great houses to outlying communities, to sources of timber in distant mountains. to sites of ritual significance that we can identify but not understand. The roads are straight, remarkably straight, cutting across terrain that would suggest curves, maintaining alignment over miles, as if straightness itself was sacred. Why did the ancestral Puebloans build roads of such width and precision? They walked, they carried goods on their backs. A narrow path would have served practical transport. The road suggests something beyond practicality. Processions, perhaps. Ritual movements, the physical expression of connections that mattered spiritually as well as economically. The roads may have been statements of relationship, declarations that this community was connected to that community, that the network was visible and permanent, that the connections were literally carved into the earth. But the roads lead to ruins now. Chaco was abandoned by 1150 CE. Its great houses emptied, its purpose transferred elsewhere or dissolved entirely. The outlying communities were abandoned too. The roads that connected them became roads to nowhere, engineering marvels serving no one, straight lines pointing toward destinations that had ceased to exist. The desert has claimed portions of the roads, has softened their edges, has begun the slow process of erasure that will eventually remove all traces. But enough remains to walk, to follow, to feel the mystery of a path built to matter, and now mattering to no one. The Inca roads offer a different scale of the same mystery. The Capac Yan, the great Inca road system, stretched over 25,000 miles through some of the most difficult terrain on Earth, across the Andes, through coastal deserts, over rivers that modern engineers would hesitate to bridge. The roads climb to altitudes where the air thins and breathing becomes labor. They descended into jungles where moisture rots what stone cannot protect. They connected an empire of 10 million people across a geography that should have made empire impossible. Much of the Inca road system still exists. Portions are still used, maintained by communities whose ancestors built the original segments. But portions lead to ruins, to administrative centers that the Spanish destroyed, to temples that the conquest abandoned, to cities that flourished under Inca rule, and then emptied when that rule ended. The roads remain, climbing mountains towards summits where nothing waits, descending valleys toward floors where only archaeology remembers what stood. The conquest was sudden. Within a generation of Francisco Pizarro's arrival, the Inca Empire had collapsed. Its population had been decimated by disease. Its governing structures had been dismantled. The roads that had carried imperial messengers now carried conquistadors. The way stations that had provided shelter for travelers were abandoned or repurposed. The system that had made the roads meaningful was gone, and the roads themselves became monuments to a purpose that had ceased to exist. Yet the roads persist. They are cut into mountainsides where erosion is slow. They are built of stones that centuries cannot easily move. They wait in the silence of altitudes where few people venture, maintained by no one, serving no one. Testimony to an empire that considered connection so important that it carved pathways across impossible terrain. The Roman roads offer yet another variation. The empire that built them lasted longer, recorded its reasons more thoroughly, left documentation that explains what the roads were for. Military movement, administrative communication, trade facilitation. The Roman roads were practical infrastructure, built to serve purposes we can understand, maintained for centuries by an empire that recognized their value. But the Roman roads also outlasted their purposes. When the Western Empire fell, when the administrative structures that maintained the roads collapsed, when the military that traveled them disbanded, the roads remained. They continued to be used. The engineering was too good to abandon entirely, but they now led to places that had changed fundamentally. The forums that had been destinations became quarries. The temples that had stood at crossroads became churches or ruins. The roads connected points that no longer needed connecting in the way Rome had intended. And at the edges of empire, the roads sometimes continue beyond where Rome's control actually extended. Roads heading into Scotland, into Germania, into the deserts of Arabia. Roads that seem to reach toward territories Rome claimed but never fully held. Were these roads of ambition, built toward conquest that never came? Were they roads of trade, connecting Roman territory to peoples beyond the frontiers? Were they roads of hope, expressions of an empire that believed its reach would always exceed its grasp? The roads remain. They lead across landscapes that have changed, toward destinations that have transformed, serving purposes that have shifted or disappeared. Walking the Roman roads today is walking through layers of time, through the empire that built them, through the medieval world that used them, through the modern world that sometimes preserves them as heritage and sometimes buries them under new construction. What do the roads that lead to nowhere tell us? Perhaps they tell us that all roads eventually lead to nowhere, that every destination is temporary, that every purpose will someday be forgotten, that the connections we build with such effort will someday be connections that no one needs. The roads are monuments to impermanence, to the certainty that what matters intensely today will someday matter to no one. But perhaps they tell us something else as well. Perhaps they tell us that the impulse to connect, to build pathways between places, to physically manifest the relationships between communities, is something deep in human nature. The roads were built because connection mattered. The roads remain because connection was worth the effort of construction that time itself cannot easily undo. The destinations may have vanished, but the roads testify to a truth that transcends any single destination. That humans have always reached toward each other, have always built pathways to bridge distances, have always believed that some connections are worth carving into the earth itself. We close this chapter standing on a road that leads to ruins. The stone beneath our feet were placed by hands that have been dust for centuries. The destination toward which the road leads was abandoned before anyone alive was born. But the road remains, straight and engineered and waiting, as if the travelers might return, as if the destination might rebuild itself, as if the purpose might be remembered by someone walking this path 1,000 years from now. in temples aligned to celestial events that no longer occur, we find evidence that time itself has moved on. The builders pointed their sacred architecture towards specific stars, towards sunrise positions on specific days, toward astronomical phenomena they considered divine. They calculated with precision that still impresses. They achieved alignments that require sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. But the heavens have shifted since then. The stars have drifted. The temples face the wrong sky. This misalignment is not failure. It is testimony. Testimony to the passage of millennia, to the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts the heavens over cycles spanning 26,000 years, to the reality that the cosmos in which we live is not static, but moving, changing, rearranging itself on timescales that exceed human memory. The temples were aligned correctly when they were built. They face the wrong stars only because the stars have moved. The builders are not diminished by this drift. They are revealed as astronomers of remarkable sophistication, revealed as peoples who understood patterns that exceed individual human lifespans, revealed as builders who created monuments that would mark time passage across ages. The Great Pyramid of Giza offers the most famous example. Its internal passages were aligned to specific stars, the descending passage pointing toward Thuban, the pole star 4,500 years ago, when the pyramid was built. The southern shaft from the king's chamber pointing toward Orion's belt, where the Egyptians believed pharaohs traveled after death. These alignments were precise when achieved. They testified to sophisticated astronomical observation, to understanding of stellar positions, to the desire to connect the pharaoh's tomb to cosmic powers. But Thuban is no longer the pole star. Earth's axis has wobbled, has shifted, has pointed toward different stars across the millennia. The passage that once aimed at the celestial north now aims at empty sky. The shaft that once pointed at Orion has drifted from its target. The pyramid remains perfectly constructed, its geometry unchanged, but the cosmos toward which it pointed has rearranged itself around a different axis. Does this misalignment diminish the pyramid? It does not. It reveals what the pyramid has witnessed. 4,500 years of celestial drift, the slow procession that ancient astronomers knew about, even if they could not prevent it, the passage of time that the monument was built to outlast. The pyramid has kept faith with its original alignment. The heavens have not kept faith with the pyramid. Angkor Wat demonstrates similar drift. The Great Temple was built in the 12th century, aligned to the spring equinox, positioned so that on that specific day the sun would rise directly over the central tower. The alignment was achieved. For the builders and for generations that followed, the equinox sunrise confirmed the temple's sacred geometry, confirmed that the structure was properly oriented toward cosmic powers, confirmed that human construction had achieved harmony with celestial movement. 800 years have passed. The alignment has drifted slightly, not dramatically, but enough that careful observation reveals the difference between what was intended and what now occurs. The temple was built for a sky that no longer quite exists. It faces the cosmos of the 12th century, frozen in stone while the heavens continued their slow rearrangement. Stonehenge presents the same phenomenon across even greater time. The monument was aligned to the summer solstice sunrise, positioned so that on the longest day, the sun would rise directly over the hailstone when viewed from the circle's center. This alignment was achieved with remarkable precision 5,000 years ago. It still works. The solstice sunrise still occurs roughly where the builders intended. But there is drift, slight but measurable, the accumulated movement of 50 centuries of precession. The builders of Stonehenge understood something profound. They understood that the heavens move in patterns that exceed human lifespan but not human observation. They understood that by watching carefully, by recording observations across generations, by transmitting astronomical knowledge from elder to youth, patterns could be detected that no individual could see. The monument they built encoded this understanding in stone, created alignment that would persist across millennia, that would continue marking celestial events long after the builders were forgotten. But did they understand precession itself? Did they know that their alignments would drift, that the stars would shift, that the cosmos would slowly rearrange itself around an axis that was itself slowly moving? Some scholars believe they did, believe that the sophisticated astronomical knowledge required to build Stonehenge included awareness of the great precessional cycle. Others believe the builders aligned their monument to the sky of their own time without awareness that future skies would differ. The truth is buried with the builders, who left no written records, who transmitted their knowledge orally until the transmission failed. The temples facing the wrong stars raise questions that exceed astronomy. They ask what it means to build for eternity when eternity itself changes. They ask whether permanence is possible in a cosmos where even the positions of stars are temporary. They ask what we are doing when we align our structures to celestial events, whether we are connecting to something eternal or merely to a moment in cosmic time that will someday be superseded. Consider the observatory at Chichen Itza, that remarkable structure called El Caracol, with its windows aligned to the positions of Venus at specific points in its cycle. The Maya tracked Venus with obsessive precision, built their calendar systems around its movements, timed warfare and rituals to coincide with its appearances. The observatory encoded their understanding in architecture, created windows that framed Venus at key moments, declared in stone that they had mastered the planet's movements. But the windows are slightly wrong now. The precession of Earth's axis, combined with other orbital factors, has shifted Venus's positions by tiny amounts. Amounts that would have been within the Maya's margin of error when the observatory was built. Amounts that have accumulated over 1,000 years until careful modern observation reveals the drift. The Maya built correctly. The cosmos has moved. What do we learn from temples facing the wrong stars? We learn that even the heavens are not permanent. We learn that the fixed stars are not truly fixed. That the cosmos we observe is a snapshot of a moving picture. that the sky under which we were born is not the sky under which our distant descendants will be born. We learn that the ancient astronomers who tracked celestial movements were studying a cosmos in motion, were establishing baseline observations that time itself would verify by showing how positions change. We learn humility. The temples were built by peoples who understood the heavens better than we often credit, who tracked celestial patterns across generations, who encoded astronomical knowledge in monuments that would preserve their observations across millennia. These were not primitive peoples making lucky guesses. These were sophisticated observers, creating permanent records of a cosmos they knew was meaningful even if they could not explain why. Their temples face the wrong stars now, not because they miscalculated, but because the cosmos has continued the movements they were tracking. We close this chapter standing in a temple at equinox, watching the sun rise, almost, but not quite, where the builders intended. The alignment was perfect 8 centuries ago. It has drifted the width of a finger, the width of the sun's disk, the accumulated movement of 800 years of precession. The temple remains. The intention remains. The sacred geometry remains. Only the cosmos has moved on, continuing the patterns that the builders observed, continuing the celestial dance that the temple was built to mark. The temples face the wrong stars, but they face the stars that existed when they were built. They preserve the cosmos of their own time, frozen in stone, while the living cosmos continues its patient rearrangement. In this, they are not failures, but time capsules, records of skies that no living eye can see, testimony to heavens that have passed, monuments to the moving universe in which all our monuments are built. Beneath the sands of Egypt, in caves sealed for centuries, in archives protected by decay itself, libraries wait. They hold scrolls that no living eye has read, texts that no living mind has comprehended, knowledge that was gathered with care and stored with intention and then sealed away by catastrophe or by choice. These are the libraries we cannot enter, collections that exist but cannot be accessed, knowledge that is preserved but cannot be retrieved. The frustration is exquisite. We know the libraries are there. We have evidence of their existence, references in ancient texts, archaeological discoveries of sealed chambers, scientific instruments that can detect voids beneath the earth. We know that knowledge waits within them, that scrolls rest in darkness that has lasted millennia, that answers to questions we cannot even frame might be written on papyrus that no one has unrolled for thousands of years. But we cannot reach them. The libraries remain closed, their contents unknown, their wisdom imprisoned in archives that time has sealed more effectively than any lock. The Villa of the Papyri at Herculaneum offers the most tantalizing example. When Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, the volcanic surge that destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum also preserved them. The extreme heat carbonized everything organic, wood, food, cloth, human bodies, but also carbonized without completely destroying. The scrolls in the villa's library were reduced to black cylinders of carbon, their papyrus transformed into charcoal, their ink surviving only as patterns in the carbonized matrix. For centuries, the scrolls were considered unreadable. Attempts to unroll them destroyed more than they revealed, crumbling the fragile carbon, losing forever whatever words might have been recovered. The scrolls sat in museum storage, visible, preserved, utterly inaccessible. They were artifacts of loss, monuments to knowledge that had survived the eruption, but could not survive the attempt to recover it. New technologies have changed this. X-ray imaging, machine learning, and computational analysis have begun unwrapping the scrolls without physically unrolling them. The carbon of the papyrus and the carbon of the ink have different densities that can be detected and distinguished. Slowly, laboriously, the texts are being read. Epicurean philosophy so far, works by Philodemus that were known only through fragments, arguments and ideas that have been sealed in carbon for nearly 2,000 years. But most of the scrolls remain unread. The process is slow. The technology is still developing. And there may be far more scrolls than have been recovered. The villa has never been completely excavated, and ground-penetrating surveys suggest additional chambers that might contain additional libraries. We stand at the threshold of recovering knowledge that was sealed by volcanic disaster. But we have not yet crossed that threshold. The library remains mostly closed, and Herculaneum is only one example. Throughout the ancient world, libraries existed that we know only through references. The Library of Alexandria, most famous of all, once held perhaps 400,000 scrolls. The accumulated knowledge of the ancient Mediterranean, gathered through centuries of systematic collection, copied and studied and preserved by generations of scholars. When the library was destroyed, whether suddenly through fire or gradually through neglect, through accident or through deliberate destruction, the loss was catastrophic. But was all of it lost? Alexandria was not just one library, but a complex of institutions. The main library was attached to the museum, but there were subsidiary collections in other temples and buildings. When the main library was damaged, some scrolls might have been moved to satellite locations. When Alexandria declined, some scrolls might have been carried to other cities. The manuscripts that survived in Byzantine monasteries, that were preserved by Islamic scholars, that eventually reached Europe through Spain and Sicily. These might include texts that were once in Alexandria, that escaped the destruction, that carry fragments of the great library's knowledge into our own time. We cannot know what was in Alexandria because we do not have the catalogue. We know that the library held works by hundreds of authors, that it contained literatures in multiple languages, that it preserved texts from civilizations across the ancient world. We know that much of what we have of ancient Greek literature, the plays of Sophocles and Euripides, the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, the histories of Herodotus and Thucydides, survived because copies existed in libraries like Alexandria's. We know that for every text that survived, many were lost. We do not know what those lost texts said. The libraries beneath churches and monasteries offer different mysteries. Throughout Europe, medieval institutions were built on the foundations of ancient ones, with Christian structures rising where pagan temples had stood. Sometimes the old structures were destroyed. Sometimes they were incorporated. and sometimes they were sealed, their chambers filled with rubble, their contents preserved by burial, their existence forgotten until modern construction or archaeology revealed them. The Vatican Library holds manuscripts that have never been fully catalogued, archives that have never been completely explored, sealed sections whose contents are known only to a few. Beneath the library that scholars can access, there may be older collections, earlier accumulations, texts that were gathered during the library's long history and then set aside for reasons that are no longer remembered. The Vatican is not secretive about the library's contents. Scholars can and do access its collections, but the sheer volume of material means that much remains unstudied, much remains unknown. What might be in the libraries we cannot enter? Perhaps medical knowledge that was lost when ancient civilizations declined, treatments and observations that would enrich modern medicine if we could recover them. Perhaps astronomical records that would reveal how ancient peoples understood the cosmos. Observations that would extend our knowledge of celestial phenomena back thousands of years. Perhaps philosophical works that would transform how we think about ethics and politics and the nature of existence. Perhaps poetry that would move us, histories that would revise our understanding of the past, religious texts that would challenge or confirm our beliefs, or perhaps mundane records, inventories of grain, accounts of livestock, administrative documents that would tell us about daily life, but would not transform our understanding of anything. The mundane and the magnificent were stored together in ancient libraries. The scroll that holds a lost play by Sophocles might rest beside a scroll that holds a farmer's tax records. The importance is in the reading, not in the storage. We close this chapter contemplating a sealed chamber beneath desert sand. The chamber exists, ground-penetrating radar has found it, has mapped its dimensions, has suggested that it contains objects that might be scrolls or might be something else entirely. The chamber has not been excavated. The desert above it is protected. The authorities who control the site have not authorized digging. Perhaps someday the chamber will be opened. Perhaps someday we will know what waits within. Perhaps the scrolls, if scrolls they are, will be readable, will reveal knowledge that has been sealed for millennia, will speak across the centuries with voices we have not heard before. Or perhaps the chamber will remain closed. Perhaps the scrolls will remain unread. Perhaps the library will keep its silence forever, its knowledge preserved but inaccessible, its wisdom waiting for readers who may never come. The libraries we cannot enter, the knowledge we cannot access, the silence of texts that might speak if only we could find the way to hear them. Who built the structures that no tradition claims? Across the world stand monuments whose creators are unknown even to the peoples who have lived beside them for centuries. Structures too old for memory, too massive for easy explanation, attributed in legend to giants or gods because no human origin could be imagined. These are the monuments built by the forgotten, testimonies to peoples who existed long enough to construct and then vanished so completely that not even their names survived. We begin with Göbekli Tepe, that site in southeastern Turkey that has revolutionized our understanding of human prehistory. Here, 11,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers who had not yet learned to farm, who had not yet domesticated animals, who had not yet developed metal tools, built a temple complex of massive carved pillars. The pillars stand up to 20 feet tall, weigh up to 20 tons, are carved with elaborate reliefs of animals, lions and boars, foxes and vultures, snakes and spiders. The pillars were quarried, transported, carved, and erected by peoples who should not have had the organization or the motivation to build such things. The contradiction haunts archaeology. Göbekli Tepe predates pottery. It predates agriculture. It predates everything we thought necessary for monumental construction. The surplus food, the specialized labor, the social hierarchy that we assumed were prerequisites for such projects. Yet there it stands, silent testimony that our assumptions were wrong, that peoples we considered primitive could organize massive construction projects, could invest generations of effort in structures whose purposes we do not understand. And then they buried it. Around 8000 BCE, the builders deliberately filled in the complex, covered the pillars with rubble and debris, hid what they had built beneath artificial hills. They did not destroy their creation, the burial preserved it remarkably well. But they concealed it, chose to end whatever use the temple had served, walked away from what had clearly been a site of enormous importance. Why? The site cannot tell us. The builders left no writing. Their language is unknown. Their culture has no surviving descendants who might preserve oral traditions. The questions we ask of Göbekli Tepe will never be answered by those who built it. Sardinia's Nuragi present similar mystery on smaller scale, but vastly larger number. Across the island stand nearly 7,000 stone towers. Circular structures of dry-laid stone, sometimes single towers, sometimes complex compounds with multiple doors and connecting walls. They were built between 1900 and 730 BCE by a culture we call the Nuragic civilization, a people who left no written records, no inscriptions, no texts that might explain who they were or why they built so many towers. The Nuragi were clearly important. The Nuragic people invested enormous effort in constructing them, maintained them across centuries, built them in patterns that suggest terrestrial organization. But were they defensive structures? Were they granaries? Were they residences for chiefs? Were they temples? The towers keep their silence. The people who built them are known only through the buildings they left behind, through the artifacts recovered from excavation, through the physical traces that reveal nothing of language or belief or identity. The Maltese temples are older than the Nuragi, older than the pyramids, among the oldest freestanding structures in the world. Gantia on Gozo dates to approximately 3600 BC, built by a Neolithic people who worked the limestone with nothing but stone tools, who moved blocks weighing tons without wheels or draft animals, who created spaces that clearly served religious purposes, but whose rituals we cannot reconstruct. The Maltese temple builders vanished around 2500 BCE. Their culture ended, was replaced or absorbed by other peoples, left behind only the temples they had built. The successor cultures used the temples. Artifacts from later periods have been found within them. But there is no indication that those later peoples knew who had built the structures or what they had originally meant. The temples were already ancient to the ancient, already mysterious to those who lived millennia ago. What does it mean that so many monuments were built by peoples we cannot identify? It means that human history is vaster than any chronicle can contain. The peoples who appear in written records, whose names and deeds were documented by themselves or by their neighbors, represent only a tiny fraction of the humans who have ever lived. Most of human history was made by people we will never know, by communities that flourished and contributed and built, and then vanished without leaving names, without leaving records, without leaving anything but the physical traces that archaeology can recover. The monuments built by the forgotten are monuments to this anonymous majority. They testify that remarkable things were achieved by peoples whose identities we cannot recover, that sophisticated cultures existed beyond our documentary horizon, that civilization, in the sense of organized construction, artistic achievement, religious devotion, predates the civilizations we know by name. We stand before these monuments and we confront the limits of knowledge, the boundary beyond which documentation fails and only stones remain. Consider the Tripilia megasites of Ukraine, settlements that housed up to 15,000 people around 4000 BC, larger than any contemporary settlement in Mesopotamia, planned and organized and then deliberately burned and abandoned. The Tripilia people left no writing. Their language is unknown. Their culture was forgotten until archaeology revealed it. For 6,000 years, these sites lay buried beneath agricultural fields, their existence unsuspected, their builders unnamed. Who were the Tripilia? What did they believe? Why did they burn their own settlements? The sites suggest theories, ritual destruction perhaps, or planned abandonment that included ritual burning. But the sites cannot confirm. The builders cannot speak for themselves. The monuments testify to their existence but not to their identity. We close this chapter standing before a monument whose builders we will never know. The stones are massive. The construction is sophisticated. The purpose is unclear. We can admire the engineering. We can measure the alignments. We can analyze the artifacts. But we cannot know who these people were, what they called themselves, what they believed about the cosmos and about their place in it. The monuments built by the forgotten remind us that most of human achievement is anonymous. The named individuals who appear in history books, the kings and prophets, the philosophers and generals, are statistical anomalies, rare exceptions to the rule of anonymity. The vast majority of humans who ever lived, including many who achieved remarkable things, left no names behind. Their contributions are woven into the fabric of human culture without attribution. Their monuments stand without dedication. Perhaps this is appropriate. The monuments outlast the names. The stones persist when the memories fade. What the builders created remains even when the builders themselves are forgotten. In this sense, the monuments are not sad memorials to lost peoples, but triumphant achievements that transcended the individuals who achieved them. The builders did not need to be remembered. What they built was enough. Not all lost civilizations were conquered. Not all fell to catastrophe or invasion, to plague or environmental disaster. Some simply walked away. Their peoples left cities they had built, temples they had carved, homes where generations had lived. They walked into landscapes that do not record their footsteps, into futures we cannot trace, leaving behind ruins that preserve everything except explanation. The Maya Classic period collapse offers the most studied example. Between approximately 800 and 950 CE, the great cities of the Maya southern lowlands, Tikal, Copan, Calakmul, Palenque, and dozens more, were abandoned. The populations that had sustained these cities for centuries dispersed into smaller communities, relocated to other regions, or simply disappeared from the archaeological record. The cities they left behind were never reoccupied. The temples they had built were never again the sites of royal ritual. The plazas they had paved fell silent and then were covered by jungle. The Maya did not disappear. Maya people survived the collapse and continue surviving today. Millions of people who speak Maya languages, who maintain Maya traditions, who are descended from the builders of the great cities. What collapsed was not the Maya people, but a particular form of Maya civilization, a political and religious system centered on divine kingship and monument building that had flourished for centuries and then ended within a few generations. Why did they walk away? The theories are multiple. Prolonged drought that stressed agriculture, warfare that depleted populations, political instability that undermined royal authority, environmental degradation that exhausted soils and deforested landscapes. Recent research emphasizes drought. Paleoclimate records show severe dry periods coinciding with the collapse, suggesting that the sophisticated water management that sustained lowland cities failed when rains did not come. But drought alone cannot explain why people left rather than adapted, why they abandoned infrastructure that had served them for centuries rather than waiting for conditions to improve. The walking away suggests something beyond material conditions, suggests that the populations had lost faith in the systems that governed them, that the divine kings who promised to intercede with gods for rain and prosperity were revealed as failures when the rains did not come, that the elaborate ritual calendar that structured Maya life no longer seemed meaningful when its promises were not fulfilled. The walking away was perhaps as much spiritual as practical, a rejection of a system that had ceased to deserve allegiance, a departure from cities whose gods had failed. The ancestral Puebloans of the American Southwest walked away more quietly, over longer periods, leaving cliff dwellings and great houses that would wait centuries to be documented by outsiders. By 1300 CE, the region that had supported tens of thousands of people, the Colorado Plateau, the Four Corners area, the canyon country of Utah and Colorado and Arizona and New Mexico, was largely empty. The settlements were abandoned. The elaborate irrigation systems fell into disuse. The people were gone. Where did they go? oral traditions of modern Pueblo peoples claim ancestry from the ancestral Puebloans, describe migrations from the ancient homelands to the locations where the Spanish found them in the 16th century. The archaeology supports these traditions. Material culture shows continuities between ancestral Puebloan sites and later Pueblo communities. The people did not vanish. They walked south and east to the Rio Grande Valley and the mesas of Hopi and Zuni, to places with more reliable water, to communities that would survive into the present. But why did they walk? Again, drought plays a role. Tree ring records show severe dry periods in the late 13th century, failures of the rains that agriculture required. But the walking away was not simple evacuation. It was transformation, a shift from dispersed settlements to aggregated pueblos, from one form of social organization to another, from ways of life that had worked for centuries to ways that would work in changed conditions. Chaco Canyon was abandoned even earlier, around 1150 CE. Its great houses emptied, its roads leading nowhere, its purpose transferred to other places or dissolved entirely. The people of Chaco did not die. They dispersed to outlying communities, to new centers that would rise and fall in their turn. But Chaco itself was never reoccupied on anything like its former scale. The great houses stood empty. The kivas where ceremonies had been performed fell silent. The roads that had connected Chaco to its network of communities led only to ruins. What makes these abandonments mysterious is not that they happened. Populations have always moved, have always responded to changing conditions by relocating, but that they were permanent. The cities that were walked away from were never reoccupied. The temples were never again centers of worship. The infrastructure that had been built with such effort was never again used. The walking away was not temporary retreat, but permanent departure. Rejection of places that had been home for generations. The abandonment of Angkor in Cambodia shows similar pattern on larger scale. The Khmer Empire's capital, which had housed perhaps 1 million people at its height, was abandoned in the 15th century. The Thai invasion of 1431 is traditionally blamed, but the capital had been declining before that, had shifted to other locations, had been partially abandoned even before the conquest. The walking away was gradual but complete. By the time French explorers encountered Angkor in the 19th century, the temples were buried in jungle, their existence unknown to the wider world. The walking away raises questions about attachment to place. We assume that people are bound to their homes, that abandoning a city requires catastrophe, that the normal state is staying rather than leaving. But the archaeological record suggests otherwise, suggests that walking away is not rare, that civilizations regularly relocate, that attachment to place is weaker than attachment to community or to survival. The cities that were walked away from were not failures. They had succeeded for centuries. But conditions changed, and the populations chose to change with them rather than to remain with the cities. We close this chapter contemplating a doorway in a cliff dwelling, framing empty canyon beyond. The doorway was crossed for the last time by someone who chose not to return, who walked toward a future we cannot trace, who left behind a home that would wait 7 centuries for visitors, who would ask the questions that the last inhabitant could not have anticipated. The cities that walked away remind us that permanence is not the only measure of success. The civilizations that walked away were not failures. They had flourished for generations, had built monuments that still inspire, had developed cultures that still resonate. They walked away because walking away was possible, because the future lay elsewhere, because the attachment to place was weaker than the will to survive and to continue. The ruins they left behind are not tombs but chrysalises, husks from which something new emerged, shells that preserve the memory of what had been while allowing what would be to begin. In museums and private collections across the world rest objects made of metal that should not exist, alloys too pure for ancient technology, compositions that require techniques supposedly invented much later, artifacts that challenge our understanding of what ancient metallurgists knew and could achieve. These anachronistic objects do not fit the narratives we have constructed about technological progress, do not align with our assumptions about what was possible when, do not respect the boundaries we have drawn between primitive and advanced. The iron pillar of Delhi stands in open air, has stood for 16 centuries, and has not rusted. This should be impossible. Iron exposed to Delhi's climate, humid monsoons, dry winters, temperature extremes, should corrode within decades. Modern iron structures in India require constant maintenance to prevent rust. Yet the pillar, erected around 400 CE, shows only a thin layer of oxidation that has protected rather than consumed the metal beneath. The pillar is 98% pure iron, with traces of phosphorus that create a protective film, worked with techniques that modern metallurgists struggle to replicate. How did 4th century Indian smiths achieve such purity? How did they work the metal to create a pillar 23 feet tall that would stand for 16 centuries? The texts of the period describe iron working, but not at this level of sophistication. The techniques are not documented. The knowledge was not transmitted to successor generations, was lost somewhere in the centuries that followed, was recovered only through analysis of the pillar itself. The iron pillar is not unique. Across India, ancient ironworks of remarkable quality survive. Large iron beams in temples, iron weapons with unusually pure composition, iron artifacts that should have rusted away but have endured. The metallurgical tradition that produced them was sophisticated in ways we are only beginning to understand. Employed techniques that were lost when the political systems that supported specialized craft production declined. In pre-Columbian America, the mysteries take different form. The peoples of Ecuador and Colombia worked platinum millennia before Europeans could achieve the temperatures required to melt it. Platinum's melting point is 1768 degrees Celsius, far beyond what any known pre-Columbian furnace could reach, yet platinum artifacts exist, small objects made by sintering, a technique that bonds platinum particles through heat and pressure without fully melting them. The technique is sophisticated, requires precise control, produces results that European metallurgists could not replicate until the 19th century. How did the peoples of ancient South America discover zittering? How did they achieve the temperatures required even for that technique? The archaeological record provides no answers. The peoples who developed these techniques left no written records, no documentation of their methods, no training manuals that might explain how knowledge was transmitted from master to apprentice. The techniques existed, the artifacts prove their existence, but the techniques themselves are lost. The Baghdad battery raises different questions. This clay jar, dating to the Parthian period around 200 CE, contains a copper cylinder and an iron rod arranged in a way that would generate a small electric current if filled with an acidic liquid. Was it actually used as a battery? The archaeological context provides no clear answer. Similar objects have been found, but not in contexts that demonstrate electrical use. Perhaps the battery was for electroplating. Experiments have shown that the setup could plate gold onto silver objects. Perhaps it was for electrotherapy. Ancient cultures did use electric fish for pain relief. Perhaps it was for something we cannot imagine. The battery challenges our narrative of electrical technology developing in the 18th and 19th centuries. If ancient peoples could generate electricity, even weakly, what did they do with it? What applications did they discover? What knowledge was lost when the cultures that possessed it declined? The questions exceed what archaeology can answer with current evidence. Antikythera mechanism represents perhaps the most famous anachronistic artifact. This corroded lump of bronze gears, recovered from a shipwreck dating to approximately 100 BCE, turns out to be an analog computer, a sophisticated mechanical device that calculated astronomical positions, predicted eclipses, tracked the cycles of the Olympic Games. The mechanism includes differential gears that were not reinvented until the Renaissance, displays astronomical knowledge that was not exceeded until Copernicus, represents engineering sophistication that seems impossible for the ancient world. The Antikythera mechanism is unique. No similar device has been found. No ancient text describes such a mechanism in detail sufficient to reconstruct it. The knowledge required to build it was clearly present. The device exists. But that knowledge was not widely transmitted, was not preserved in documentation, was lost when the traditions that created it ended. What do these anachronistic artifacts tell us? They tell us that technological progress is not linear, that knowledge can be gained and lost and gained again, that ancient peoples sometimes achieved things we do not credit them with achieving. They tell us that our narratives of advancement, from primitive to advanced, from simple to complex, are oversimplified, that the actual history of technology includes reversals and losses as well as progress. They also tell us that much knowledge was never documented. The techniques that produced the iron pillar were not written down, were transmitted orally, were learned through apprenticeship, were lost when the chain of transmission was broken. The knowledge that created the Antikythera mechanism was held by specialists whose tradition ended without successors. The metallurgy of ancient South America was a craft tradition that flourished and then ceased without leaving records. We live in an age of documentation. Assume that important knowledge will be recorded, that techniques will be preserved in manuals and textbooks. But documentation is historically rare. Most of what humans have known has been transmitted orally, preserved in practice rather than in writing, vulnerable to loss when the practitioners died without training successors. The anachronistic artifacts are fossils of lost knowledge, evidence that understanding existed, evidence that techniques were developed, evidence that the knowledge was not preserved. We close this chapter contemplating a bronze artifact in a museum case, an object whose manufacture required techniques we cannot fully explain, whose composition suggests knowledge that was not documented, whose existence proves that ancient metallurgists knew things we have not recovered. The artifact sits in climate-controlled silence, examined by scholars who can analyze its composition but cannot replicate its manufacture, who know what it is but not how it was made, the metal that should not exist, the techniques that were lost, the knowledge that preceded our knowledge by millennia, the reminder that progress is not inevitable, that what is learned can be unlearned, that the achievements of ancient peoples were sometimes greater than we have assumed. Did they exist? The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, celebrated in ancient texts as one of the 7 wonders of the world, described in vivid detail by Greek and Roman writers, have left no certain trace. No Babylonian inscription mentions them. No archaeological excavation has found them. No definitive evidence confirms that they were ever built. The gardens have dissolved into legend, existing only in descriptions that may be accurate or may be imagination, that may describe a real place or may describe a dream that was never realized. The descriptions are magnificent. Terraces rising like mountains, planted with trees that seem to float above the desert, irrigated by ingenious machinery that lifted water from the Euphrates to heights where water should not flow. The gardens were said to have been built by Nebuchadnezzar for his wife Amity, who missed the green hills of her homeland in Media and pined for vegetation in the flat, arid landscape of Babylon. The king built her a mountain, built her a forest, built her the impossible made possible through love and engineering. The story is romantic. The story is memorable. The story has been repeated for 2.5 millennia, but the story may not be true. Nebuchadnezzar left extensive inscriptions describing his building projects in Babylon. The walls, the temples, the palaces, the Ishtar Gate, but none mention gardens. The silence is troubling. A king who documented his construction so thoroughly would surely have documented a wonder of the world. Perhaps the gardens were in Nineveh rather than Babylon. Some scholars believe the descriptions actually refer to gardens built by Assyrian king Sennacherib in his northern capital. Gardens that are mentioned in Assyrian records that were indeed an engineering marvel of irrigation and cultivation. The later Greeks, knowing Babylon was famous and not knowing Nineveh was equally magnificent, may have relocated the gardens in their imagination, may have attached real engineering to the wrong city. Perhaps the gardens existed but were destroyed before Herodotus visited Babylon, before the Greek and Roman writers whose accounts survive could see them with their own eyes. Perhaps what they describe was tradition, stories passed down from earlier visitors, legends that became more elaborate with each retelling, descriptions of something that had once existed but no longer did. Perhaps the gardens were exaggerated. Perhaps there were gardens in Babylon, roof gardens, palace gardens, green spaces within the massive walls that were impressive but not miraculous, that later writers described with enthusiasm that exceeded accuracy, that became more wondrous in memory than they had been in reality. Or perhaps the garden never existed at all. Perhaps they were wish rather than reality, dream rather than construction, the kind of marvel that people want to believe in, whether or not it was ever built. The ancient world loved lists of wonders, loved describing the magnificent achievements of distant lands. Perhaps the hanging gardens were added to such lists, not because anyone had seen them, but because they completed the image of Babylon as the most magnificent city in the world. The uncertainty is itself instructive. We want to know whether the gardens existed. We want definitive answer, yes or no, real or imaginary, history or myth. But the evidence does not permit definitive answer. The garden exists in a space between history and legend, possible but not proven, described but not confirmed, celebrated but not verified. Other ancient wonders share this uncertainty. The Colossus of Rhodes, that massive bronze statue of Helios, said to have straddled the harbour entrance, left no archaeological trace. Existed for only 56 years before an earthquake toppled it, was seen by ancient travellers who described it in terms that later ages found incredible. Did it really bestride the harbour, ships passing between its legs? The physics seem impossible. The descriptions may be exaggerated. The Colossus existed. Multiple sources confirm this. But what it actually looked like is uncertain. The lighthouse of Alexandria lit the harbour for centuries, was one of the tallest structures of the ancient world, guided countless ships to safe port. Its ruins have been found underwater, toppled by earthquakes, preserved beneath the Mediterranean. The lighthouse existed, but its appearance is known only through coins and descriptions, through reconstructions that may or may not be accurate. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, all existed. All left some archaeological trace. All are known through descriptions whose accuracy cannot be fully verified. The ancient wonders were real, but our knowledge of them is filtered through centuries of retelling, through descriptions that may have been accurate or may have been embellished, through traditions that preserved memory but also transformed it. The gardens that dissolved into legend represent the fate of all wonders. Even those that leave archaeological evidence will someday leave only stories. The pyramids will erode. The Great Wall will crumble. The monuments we consider permanent will become traditions, will become legends, will dissolve into uncertainty as the hanging gardens have dissolved. We close this chapter standing on the plain where Babylon once stood. where gardens may or may not have hung from terraces, where water may or may not have been lifted to impossible heights, where Nebuchadnezzar may or may not have built a mountain for a queen who missed her homeland's green hills. The plain is flat. The ruins are rubble. The gardens, if they existed, have left no trace. But the legend remains, beautiful, romantic, certain, the legend of what might have been, the legend of what we want to believe, the legend of gardens that existed perfectly in imagination, even if they never existed perfectly in reality. Before the voyages we remember, there were voyages we have forgotten. Before Columbus, before the Vikings, before the Phoenicians whom history credits with circumnavigating Africa, there were sailors who crossed oceans and left no records, who reached shores that no chronicle documented, who connected continents that official history considers unconnected. The evidence is scattered and contested. Artifacts where they should not be, crops where they could not have spread naturally, genetic signatures that cross oceans without explanation. The ships that sail beyond memory left wakes that time has almost erased. The Polynesians offer the clearest example. Across the vast Pacific, the largest expanse of water on Earth, distances that would intimidate modern navigators, the Polynesians spread from island to island, colonizing lands that no human had ever seen, reaching New Zealand and Hawaii and Easter Island without charts or compasses or metal tools. They navigated by stars and currents, by the flight of birds and the color of clouds, by knowledge accumulated over generations and transmitted through teaching that left no written record. The voyages were deliberate. The Polynesians did not drift to the distant islands by accident. They built double-hulled canoes capable of crossing thousands of miles of open ocean. They provisioned for journeys that might take weeks. They brought plants and animals to establish colonies on islands where nothing edible grew. They planned and executed expeditions that rank among the greatest navigational achievements in human history. Yet we remember almost nothing of specific voyages. No navigator's name survives from the great age of Polynesian expansion. No log records the discovery of Hawaii or New Zealand or the dozens of other islands that the Polynesians found and settled. The achievement is known only through its results, the presence of Polynesian peoples across the Pacific, not through any chronicle of how the achievement was accomplished. And the Polynesians may have gone further. The sweet potato, a South American crop, was present in Polynesia before European contact. Chickens and Asian domesticate were present in South America before Europeans arrived. The evidence suggests contact, trade, or accidental encounter between Polynesia and South America, contact that no chronicle records, that left only biological traces. The Romans may have reached shores they did not document. Roman coins have been found in various unlikely places. In India, where we know Romans traded, but also allegedly in America, where we do not know Romans traveled. Most of these finds are questionable. Coins could have been dropped by later visitors, could have been planted as hoaxes, could be misidentified. But the Roman world was connected to distant lands through trade networks that we may not fully understand. through voyages that merchants may have made without official documentation, through contacts that left commercial traces but not historical records. The Phoenicians, those great sailors of the ancient Mediterranean, reportedly circumnavigated Africa around 600 BCE, a voyage recorded by Herodotus, who doubted its truth but reported it anyway. The sailors claimed that as they sailed around Africa's southern tip, the sun was on their right, to the north, which Herodotus found incredible, but which is exactly what would happen in the southern hemisphere. The detail suggests the voyage was real, that sailors rounded the Cape of Good Hope 2,000 years before Vasco da Gama. Did they go further? Some theories propose Phoenician voyages to America, proposed that the great sailors of the ancient world crossed the Atlantic as they crossed so many other seas. The evidence is thin. Alleged inscriptions, supposed artifacts, claimed resemblances between Old World and New World cultures. Most scholars dismiss these claims. But the ocean remembers nothing. Ships that sank left no records. Voyages that ended in disaster left no survivors to report. The Chinese may have sailed further than official records admit. The voyages of Zheng He in the early 15th century are documented. Massive fleets that reached Africa, that could have gone further, that were recalled when Chinese policy turned inward. But Chinese sailors had been crossing the Indian Ocean for centuries before Zheng He had established trading posts throughout Southeast Asia, had accumulated navigational knowledge that could have supported voyages beyond what chronicles record. Gavin Menzies' claims that Chinese fleets circumnavigated the globe before Columbus have been widely rejected by historians. But the rejection does not mean Chinese sailors never reached distant shores. Informal traders, unofficial voyages, ships blown off course. These could have created contacts that official chronicles never recorded, that left only traces that we may interpret correctly or may misunderstand. The ships that sailed beyond memory sailed into a darkness that will never be fully illuminated. The ocean keeps no archives. The shores that may have received visitors from distant lands have been transformed by later arrivals, by civilizations that overwrote earlier evidence, by time that erases footprints. We are left with traces, artifacts where they should not be, crops that crossed oceans somehow, genetic evidence of contacts that history does not record. We close this chapter standing on a shore that sailors may have reached millennia before recorded history began. The waves break as they have always broken. The horizon stretches as it has always stretched. Ships may have appeared on that horizon, or may not have appeared, in times beyond memory. The shore does not remember. The ocean does not record. What happened here, if anything happened, is lost in the silence of the sea. Beneath pyramids and palaces, beneath temples and tombs, chambers wait in darkness, sealed since antiquity, their contents unknown, their existence confirmed by modern instruments but not by modern eyes. These buried chambers represent the frontier between what we know and what we might learn, between what archaeology has revealed and what archaeology might still reveal. They are sealed not by impossibility, but by choice, by political constraints, by technological limitations, by the ethical questions that surround disturbing what was meant to remain undisturbed. The Great Pyramid of Giza contains voids that have never been entered. In 2017, physicists using muon tomography, a technique that uses cosmic ray particles to image stone, discovered a large void above the Grand Gallery, a space at least 30 meters long that no known passage reaches, that no modern human has ever seen. What is in that void? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps it is an architectural feature, a stress-relieving chamber like others in the pyramid, empty by design. Perhaps something. Perhaps it contains objects placed there when the pyramid was sealed. Artifacts that have waited 45 centuries for viewers who may or may not ever come. The Egyptian authorities have not authorized drilling or excavation to access the void. The Great Pyramid is too precious, too irreplaceable, too central to human heritage to risk damage through investigation that might find nothing. The chamber waits, its existence known, its contents unknown, its future uncertain. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang presents similar mysteries on larger scale. The first emperor of China was buried in 210 BCE, beneath a massive mound that remains unexcavated. His tomb is described in ancient texts. Sima Qian, writing a century after the burial, claimed the tomb contains rivers of mercury, representing China's great rivers. A ceiling painted with constellations, crossbows rigged to kill intruders, treasures beyond counting. Modern surveys have detected extremely high mercury concentrations in the soil above the tomb, suggesting that at least part of Sima Qian's account is accurate. But the tomb remains sealed. Chinese authorities have chosen not to excavate, arguing that current technology is insufficient to preserve whatever might be found, that what has waited 2,000 years can wait longer. The terracotta army that guards the outer precincts has been excavated. 8,000 clay soldiers, each unique, testimony to the scale of the emperor's funerary preparations. But the burial chamber itself, the place where the emperor's body was laid to rest, remains closed. What might be found if the tomb were opened? Perhaps the rivers of mercury, the painted constellations, the treasures that Sima Qian described. Perhaps disappointment. Tombs are often robbed, often disturbed, often less than legends promise. Perhaps something entirely unexpected. Artifacts and arrangements that no ancient text describes, that would transform our understanding of early Chinese civilization. The waiting is itself significant. The buried chambers that remain sealed represent choices about knowledge, choices that some truths are not worth the cost of pursuing them, that some mysteries are better preserved than solved, that the future may have capabilities that the present lacks and deserves the chance to exercise them. These are not arbitrary choices. They reflect genuine tensions between the desire to know and the obligation to preserve, between the curiosity that drives archaeology and the responsibility that should constrain it. Beneath the temple of the feathered serpent at Teotihuacan, a tunnel was discovered in 2003, a passage sealed for nearly 2,000 years, leading to chambers beneath the pyramid. The excavation has proceeded slowly, carefully, revealing offerings and artifacts, and the remains of rituals whose purposes we can only guess. But the tunnel leads further than excavation has yet reached. Chambers lie ahead that have not been opened, that may contain the burials of Teotihuacan's rulers. Rulers whose identities we do not know, because Teotihuacan, that great city of perhaps 150,000 inhabitants, left no readable writing. The pattern repeats across the ancient world. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing techniques reveal voids beneath monuments, suggest chambers beneath surfaces, indicate spaces that might contain treasures or might contain nothing. Each discovery raises the same questions. Should we excavate? Can we preserve what we find? Do we have the right to disturb what was meant to remain sealed? The buried chambers still sealed are monuments to patience. They have waited centuries, millennia, for visitors who may or may not come. They preserve whatever they contain in conditions that modern intervention might destroy. Stable temperatures, controlled humidity, absence of light and oxygen that can damage organic materials. The sealing was deliberate, was intended to protect, was an act of preservation that we might honor best by continuing. We close this chapter standing above a buried chamber, perhaps the Great Pyramid's void, perhaps the first emperor's tomb, perhaps one of the countless sealed spaces that modern technology has detected but not entered. The chamber is there, below our feet, separated from us by meters of stone, but also by choices about whether knowledge is worth the costs of pursuing it. The buried chambers wait. They have waited for millennia. They will wait longer if we choose, will preserve their secrets until we are ready, if we are ever ready, to receive them. This journey ends where all journeys end, in silence, in the spaces where cities stood and no longer stand, in the emptiness that follows the fullness of civilization, in the quiet that descends when the last voice has faded, when the last temple has been abandoned, when the last child has been born to parents who will leave no descendants who remember who they were. The lost civilizations we have explored were not lost to themselves. They were home to peoples who lived full lives, who loved and grieved, who built and destroyed, who looked at stars and wondered what they meant. They were complete worlds, as complete as our world seems to us. Worlds that seemed permanent to those who lived in them. Worlds that seemed like they would last forever. They did not last forever. Nothing lasts forever. The cities were abandoned or destroyed. The languages were forgotten. The scripts became unreadable. The knowledge was lost, or was transformed so thoroughly that what remained was unrecognizable as descendant of what had been. The silence descended, not suddenly, usually, but gradually, as populations declined and skills were forgotten, and the chain of transmission that connects each generation to the next was broken link by link. We stand now in that silence, stand in ruins that were once homes, walk streets that once echoed with voices, touch stones that hands placed millennia ago, hands that are dust now, belonging to people whose names are lost, whose faces cannot be imagined, whose hopes and fears we will never know. The silence is not empty. It is full, full of everything that was, full of the lives that were lived, full of the achievements that were achieved. The silence holds what the archives lost, what the fires destroyed, what time erased. The silence is the only record that remains of most of what humanity has been. We have asked questions throughout this journey. Who built? Why they vanished? What they knew? What we have lost? The questions have no answers, or have only partial answers, or have answers that we cannot verify. The lost civilizations keep their secrets. They speak in languages we do not understand, through scripts we cannot read, through monuments whose purposes we can only guess. They are present but not accessible. They testify but do not explain. Perhaps this is appropriate. Perhaps some knowledge is meant to remain beyond reach. Perhaps the proper response to the lost civilizations is not explanation, but wonder at what was achieved, wonder at what was lost, wonder at the fact that humans have been building and losing civilizations for longer than any single tradition can remember. The silence where cities were is not the silence of failure. It is the silence of completion, of stories that had beginnings and middles and ends, of civilizations that rose and flourished and fell, as all civilizations rise and flourish and fall. Our civilization will someday join them in silence. Our cities will someday be ruins. Our languages will someday be dead. Our knowledge will someday be fragments that future peoples puzzle over, if future peoples exist to puzzle. But the silence is not the only truth. The ruins remain. The artifacts survive. The monuments still stand, weathered but present. Testimony that what was built, that what was achieved, that the lives that were lived were real, even if they are forgotten. The silence surrounds the ruins, but does not erase them. The lost civilizations are lost, but not gone. We close this journey, standing in twilight at the edge of ruins, ruins whose builders are unknown, whose purpose is uncertain, whose silence is profound. The sun sets behind mountains that have watched civilizations rise and fall without changing. The stars emerge, the same stars roughly that the builders watched, shifted slightly by precession, but still recognizable. Still the patterns that humans have navigated by for tens of thousands of years. The lost civilizations are out there in the silence. They wait for us to find what can be found, to remember what can be remembered, to honor what can be honored. They are part of our inheritance, the human inheritance that includes not just what we know, but what we have lost, not just what we remember, but what we have forgotten, not just the civilizations that survived, but the ones that vanished. The night deepens. The ruins darken. The silence settles over everything, over what was and what is and what will be. And somewhere in that silence, the lost civilizations whisper still, whisper of achievements that exceeded what we credit them with, whisper of knowledge that was lost and might be recovered, whisper of peoples who were fully human as we are, who lived and loved and built and lost and vanished into the silence that awaits all living things. Sleep now. Let the lost civilizations rest in the silence that has held them for millennia. Let the mysteries remain mysterious. Let the questions remain unanswered. Let the wonder remain. The wonder that is the proper response to everything we do not know, to everything we cannot know, to the vast majority of a human experience that is lost and will never be recovered. The final silence where cities were. The eternal quiet of the forgotten. The peace that waits at the end of all things. Good night. Sleep well. And dream of the lost. Dream of the civilizations that vanished. The cities that drowned. The peoples that walked away. The knowledge that was buried and may someday be found. Dream of the silence. Dream of what it holds. Dream of the sacred mystery of everything humanity has been. And wake remembering that we too are a part of this long story. That our cities too will someday be ruins. That our language too will someday be dead. That we too will someday join the lost civilizations in the silence that is not ending, but transformation. Not loss, but the eternal becoming of everything that has been and everything that will be. The lost civilizations, forever silent, forever present, forever waiting in the darkness that is not darkness, but simply another form of light. Closing. The veiled horizon, the dawn approaches, though we cannot yet see it. Beyond the horizon where the lost civilizations wait, beyond the silence where the answers rest, the light is gathering. Not light that will reveal all secrets. Some mysteries are eternal, but light that reminds us that the night does not last forever, that the silence is not the final word, that the search for understanding continues, even when understanding remains incomplete. We have journeyed through the lost, through cities drowned and scripts sealed, through roads abandoned and temples misaligned, through libraries closed and monuments forgotten. We have touched the edge of what can be known and acknowledged the vastness of what cannot. We have honored the builders and mourned what they built. We have wondered at achievements that exceeded what we credit and grieved for knowledge that will never be recovered. The lost civilizations were not inferior to us. They were different from us. Different in technology, different in belief, different in the categories through which they understood existence. But they were not less capable. Not less creative, not less human. They achieved things we cannot replicate. They knew things we do not know. They built monuments that have outlasted their cultures by millennia, that will outlast ours if ours follows the pattern that all civilizations follow. The silence where they rest is not emptiness. It is fullness beyond our capacity to access. Fullness of lives lived, of loves felt, of meanings made, of everything that constitutes human existence compressed into the fragments that survive. The silence holds more than we can imagine, because what was lost exceeds what we can calculate. Rest now. Let the lost civilizations keep their silence. Let the mysteries remain unresolved. Let the questions persist as questions, which is perhaps their proper form, since questions open us to wonder while answers close us to it. The dawn will come. It always comes. And with the dawn, the search will continue. For the drowned cities, the sealed scripts, the abandoned roads, the lost libraries, the forgotten knowledge. The search will not end because it cannot end. The lost civilizations call to us across the silence, invite us to keep seeking even when we cannot find, keep wondering even when we cannot know. Sleep well. Dream of the lost and the found. Dream of the silence and what it holds. Dream of the civilizations that rose and fell, and wait in the darkness for us to remember them. And wake knowing that you are part of this story. That the story of human civilization includes you. Includes your seeking and your wondering. Includes everything you build and everything you lose. Includes the contribution you make to the ongoing mystery of what it means to be human. The lost civilizations, the veiled horizon, the sacred silence where all journeys begin and end. Good night, good night, good night.